I'm Mark Seifter.
And I'm Linda Zias Palmer.
And this is Arcane Mark.
Hello, everybody!
Welcome to Arcane Mark. It's an ambush today where we're going to be talking to you about ambushes in RPGs. Honestly, there can be strife at your table with ambushes depending on how the players and the GMs go about it. So before we get into how to avoid that, let's define an ambush. Let's make sure that you and we are talking about the same thing when we're talking about ambushes.
Yeah, so an ambush in your tabletop RPG is going to be a combat in which some or all of the members of one side are not aware that the combat is about to happen. So one side attacks, and at least some of the other side are caught with their pants down.
That's right. So in order for something to be an ambush, generally you have one full side that has been aware in advance about the other group being there, and then attempts to launch an unanticipated surprise attack on that other group with potentially some degree of success. Now, it's possible to have an ambush in your game where it turns out that it's so flubbed that everybody on both sides finds out about it in the midst of the catastrophically bad ambush from the ambusher's side. But on the other hand, it can go all the way out to the ambushers completely getting the drop on all of the party who is ambushed. And so that's what we mean when we're talking about an ambush. Now, why can this lead to kind of butting heads within the group? And the reason for that is, let's get into the mechanics of ambushes.
Yeah.
Now, it depends on what tabletop RPG you're playing. Ambushes can have many different implementations, and they range really wildly, which is why you can have some real vehemence at your table about that.
Well, one of the first ingredients you'll need, regardless of your system, is a reason why Team Ambushers is not being noticed by Team Ambushed. So you might have a situation like some sort of a cover that people are hiding behind. You might have darkness. You might have, they're coming in from another room. You might have magic like invisibility or something like that. You might have a sort of hiding in plain sight situation if you have a creature like a mimic is the classic example where people look at it and they don't realize that that's a monster.
That's true. Now, what Linda described is actually the second thing you need for an ambush. If you only have a situation where you might not be able to see the other side, you could wind up with something like that old editions of D&D have, where you would roll a random dice to determine what the distance is before both parties are like, blah? We didn't even know we were about to run into each other.
So what would you consider goes first
the
before
first thing that comes before a justification for how you weren't noticed is actually how you did notice the other group first. Because if neither group notices each other, like I said, it's like, they used to have a rule where it was like, roll, I don't remember what it was. It was like 1d6 times 10, and that's the starting distance. And at this point, both groups find out about each other because it was kind of assumed. The default was, you're wandering the woods or going through a cave, and maybe nobody knows that it's going to happen. So the first thing you actually need for an ambush is either scouting or good senses or high perception or magic, or some other way that you have determined, and by you, I don't mean necessarily the PCs, I mean whichever group is the ambushing group has determined that the other group is coming. Or
there may not need to be a specific, we have great senses if the group that's being ambushed is really obvious. So, for example,
the other option,
Paladin.
But there is one other option, which is the ambushing group, like the mimic, is not even moving around.
Yeah.
It's just staying literally where it is in a very stealthy position, hoping, and the way that they're going to find out about another group is the other group comes across them, but they're just always ready for an ambush. And so they don't need to know that the other group is coming as long as they can eventually see them. So that could be the answer, is maybe you don't have great senses, but you're just always hiding or disguising.
Or you have something that's going to you might have some kind of unusual magical sense, like wave sense or tremor sense, or something that lets you just tell that creatures are there when they can't see you with their more typical senses like sight and hearing.
That's right. So step one is the justification for how you even have a chance to get the ambush, which is either you scouted, you have a special sense, you've noticed them, your perception is high, or I am always ready for an ambush. Then step 2, like Linda said, is the justification for how you weren't noticed. Whether that's thick underbrush, whether that is your tremor sensing, but also burrowing in the ground and you're going to emerge from the earth.
I actually do think that for my purposes, I would flip those, because I think that if you don't have a justification for why you can spring an ambush, then you don't have an ambush encounter in the first place.
Interesting. Whereas I would think that if you can't find them or just always be hiding, then you can't do an ambush. But if you can find them, then you might be able to be, even if you find, let's say, you're the PCs or you're an enemy and you use clairvoyance and you find something that's 500 feet away and you're like, well, where I am right now is the middle of an open plain. You can go ahead and be like, well, but over there's cover. So you can go looking for a spot to make an ambush once you have determined that there's a reason to do an ambush.
Yeah, I think it could go either way, depending upon how folks want to think about it and structure it.
That's right. The most important thing with both of these is it needs to be justified in the narrative. Some of the times you can get a clash at your table with ambushes is when either the GM or the players, or both, are trying to trigger ambushes just automatically, possibly because your system gives overpowered benefits for an ambush, with no justification or minimal justification, or just repeatedly the same justification over and over and over again.
And then it's like, well, we know that that's the thing that happens.
This is the 250th fight where we've always ambushed doing the exact same ambush.
Yeah, and I think another thing there, too, is if it comes and there's not really a way to prevent it, or it doesn't make sense in the story. So, for example, if there is box text type thing, like read aloud, that tells the GM, okay, there's an ambush that happens right here, and there's no way for the PCs to notice it. It just says, these enemies are so stealthy that the PCs are automatically ambushed. Or, if it like assumes specific things about what the characters will or won't do and locks off options for how they might respond.
That's right. So we're going to get into advanced GMing techniques of how to use ambushes, how to make it less likely that people butt heads over ambushes at the end. We're moving into step 2, phase 2 of the video, where we've now defined ambushes. We've defined what you need to have an ambush. Let's talk about the mechanics RPGs use for ambushes. Now, some of my favorite RPGs have some of the worst possible mechanics that you can possibly use for ambushes, and that's because they're very intuitive. The worst mechanic you can use for an ambush in terms of the swinginess of it and how much it can just really mess up the game or lead to an argument about whether you got an ambush or not is...
free bonus turn.
A surprise round or an ambush round where the group that ambushes just gets to take an additional turn before everybody else can go. However, that is part and parcel of Pathfinder 1, many editions of Dungeons & Dragons that had those kind of surprise rounds. And the reason for it is it's kind of makes sense. It's like, well, if they didn't notice you were coming, then you can just do something. Everybody can do something, and then that's when they notice you. So, it sort of makes intuitive sense outside of the game world, but just from a perspective of, a game.
Or just, ambushes, how effective you could think that, an ambush would be in real life. But, but for the sake of game balance, it doesn't really create situations that are as effective. Because like Mark was saying, it creates a situation where people are incredibly incentivized to set ambushes and also to do everything they can to avoid ambushes.
That's true. Also, people tend to think that ambushes or something like a coup de grace is, more possible for anybody to pull off, even against a more trained or higher level opponent, than they really are in real life, based on movies and other things like that. So, legitimately, I know of a situation where somebody who didn't know what they were doing came at someone in their sleep and tried to stab them. Managed to, get small 6 stabs on them, but the person who was sleeping woke up, was more skilled at sort of that kind of thing, and managed to, survive and disarm them from that. So the point about it is that if you come at it from, realistically, whoever got the ambush would always win. Just with humans in the animal kingdom, it's not true that the ambusher always wins. They definitely have an advantage. So I wouldn't come at it from a realism perspective of that you should give an overwhelming advantage. Personally, I think giving a nice advantage that people like to have, but it doesn't feel oppressive, is more important.
So I would say that the next kind of step on that sliding scale to getting an extra full bonus turn is the regular turn happens, but you're guaranteed to go first before the people who didn't notice you.
Yes, that is similar, but it's not quite as bad because the thing that's really awful about a surprise round is if your group also who's ambushing, which could be the bad guys or the PCs, if they also win initiative, they get 2 turns in a row. Going first is already pretty strong. In fact, it is so strong that in some senses, in some games of, say, Pathfinder 1, one of those powerful abilities in the game was something like the Diviner Wizard had that allowed them to always act on the surprise round, combined with teamwork feats that your group could use so that if the wizard acted, everybody else could act.
Yes.
Essentially making it so that your group could never be surprised. Because if you were surprised, you could very easily have a total party wipe before anybody could go. Now, it's possible to create a tabletop RPG system where one group can get a full round without it necessarily completely swinging the fight, but it would have to be one that is a very slow-paced, where you take tons of, like, combats take a really long time. You have to chew through lots of hit points. There's not really spells that are going to end the fight or really swing things by a lot. And the group that is being ambushed would still need to be at a very large advantage for that extra turn to not just kind of at least make things much more likely to turn into a loss for them. So if you have a system that is both very slow and very favored for, let's say, the PCs, because you're probably not playing one where it's very favored for the enemies, then you might be able to get away with that role. In general, though, we would want to move into lighter ones. Like Linda said, the next one is maybe the ambush people the ambushers go first, or someone who's ambushed goes last. That way, if you notice the ambush, you roll in,
but then
everybody
who's ambushed
last.
goes next, yes.
That is a kind of nicer way to do something that is sort of similar in that sense. Now, on the other hand, if you talk about what actually happens with people who are very trained or animals that have strong senses, normally, when somebody like starts an ambush, when you watch how these things happen, it doesn't take until after every single ambusher and the people who notice them coming act before those with strong instincts just start responding in some way to it. It's actually just after the first person does anything.
Yeah.
So another way you could do it, and in some systems this is the same as what Linda said, in a system such as, say, Daggerheart, where theoretically the PCs take turns one at a time, and at any time it could switch over to the enemies, but only if the PCs either roll in a certain way or the GM spends a resource to do so. You might just allow one PC to, one of the ambushers
to
go first. And then be like, okay, that was the ambush. Everybody else is going to roll after that. And your group coordinated the ambush, so you can decide, any of you, who is going to be the one that goes first.
Is that a bonus turn, or this first on the...
Maybe that could be either one.
Yeah,
that could either be a bonus turn, or it could be, this person is first on initiative, everyone else is now rolling in response to that. And but you get to choose the best possible person in your group for the one that's
another consideration there too with the do the ambushers go first is that it also makes a big difference whether the initiative is redetermined each round, because if the ambushers always go first on every turn, that's a lot more powerful than they go first on the first turn and then you keep checking to see how fast people go.
That's right. Now in some RPGs that work on attack-based rolls versus defense-based rolls, where you don't necessarily have a lot of hit points, but you get to roll a defense to like negate part of the attack, what they can sometimes do is say that ambushers, you don't get a defense roll, which actually can also be very brutal in its own way, because you can get a very strong hit on that first turn. Or they might say, you don't get a defense roll unless you've acted before the ambusher.
You also can see something similar to this idea with the idea of, you dealing sneak attack damage to people who aren't aware of your presence, with things like assassins and rogues and things like that.
Or the enemies being off guard and having lowered defenses. In Pathfinder 2, you have a situation where if there is an ambush, you're actually rolling the stealth for the ambush as part of initiative. So you never have the issue of what if I rolled high, really, really, really high on stealth, but then I also rolled really, really, really low on initiative. Because if you rolled really, really high on stealth, that was your initiative roll. You still might not have beaten the enemy if their perception was incredibly high.
But that just means that they noticed you.
Yes. So Pathfinder 2 kind of like weasels out of dealing with this by having the initiative be something that is a perception versus stealth situation. So there's not a separate roll of that necessarily, and then also an initiative. There's other ways to do it too. You could give bonuses or penalties on initiative based on the ambush. You could give bonus damage to the ambushers, like Linda was saying with sneak attack, but maybe as a system rule. And various different systems have their own rules for that. Like, we've went through a few of them right now. Obviously, in systems that are based on just moves for turns for the PCs, the ability to do an ambush successfully would mean it didn't switch over to the enemy's move. And therefore that you would get an attack, which is similar, as I said before, to like letting one PC act first.
Yeah. I see a question in chat. If you roll stealth as part of initiative, is it intended that you add the circumstance bonus from cover to the initiative?
So, that question is whether you use a circumstance bonus on a roll in Pathfinder 2 that is an initiative roll. I would say that depends on whether or not the circumstance bonus was crucial or was being used in the initiative, right? So if for some reason you are rolling a performance check for initiative and you're playing the violin and you have a feat that gives you a circumstance bonus to playing the violin, and the GM is like, yes, your violin playing is actually how you're getting into this initiative. Now, that's not going to happen very often, but it might. I think you should get to do it. Whereas if you're not playing the violin or your performance was, well, you're using performance to give a speech. Or really it's acting, and that could have been deception, but I'm letting you use performance to like act your way through because you have a bard feat to do that, but you're not playing the violin, so we're not adding it. So I would say if you have a circumstance bonus, it should apply in the circumstance where that's important. So for example, if you are if what you're doing is that you're planning on just like skulking behind cover, that'd be different than if you just came from cover, but you're actually attacking, potentially. But it's up to the GM to make that decision.
Yeah, I mean, circumstance bonuses, the name itself indicates that it's supposed to apply when that particular circumstance is in play. So
that's right.
It's always a bit of a judgment call.
Otherwise, you could try to claim that if you just said, oh, well, if there's ever cover, you got an initiative bonus, that you could try to claim that, like, everyone who was around the corner, which maybe was both groups from each other, got total cover and got a huge circumstance bonus against each other. Yeah. Which then canceled out or just made rolling stealth much better than rolling perception. So you have to think about sort of the group and who's rolling stealth and who's rolling perception and whether or not that makes sense in the situation. All right, so we talked about mechanics for ambushes. And you know what? Even if your game has a really brutal mechanic for an ambush, you can house rule it to be a little bit less brutal, especially if you found that ambushes make things very swingy. Or otherwise, you'll wind up with situations like our group in Pathfinder 1, where pretty much everybody just had one person with an ability to automatically avoid ambushes, and the rest of the people with a feat that said that they would join in with the wizard. In one group we were playing, I was the only one who didn't have that, and that's because I had like 5 extra lives on my character that if I died that I would come back. And so it was more of a like, I was not the most powerful or useful person to kill, so it was like, yeah, sure, you want to kill my character? Go ahead. It's not going to stick. So basically, let's move in from mechanics of ambushes and how you can adjust them in your game to an even more advanced topic, which is deploying ambushes in the game. And from the GM's perspective, deploying ambushes and dealing with player ambushes, especially when the players want to do the same ambush every time.
Yep. So I do see one comment in the chat that is relevant to this topic, which is map size is such an overlooked impact on TTRPG ambushes. Absolutely. when you're thinking about how distant people are when the ambush starts, it makes a huge difference. If it's like, really close in, it's harder to hide, but it's easier for the opponents to get up and do powerful melee attacks. Or if they're ambushers who prefer to act from range, it's easy for them to get started with kiting while the PCs have to spend a lot of time going up to them.
That's right. So as the GM, you have control of the world. That means you can easily make it easy for an enemy group to ambush the PCs. You can put in things that are features that improve their chances of ambushing the PCs. You could just declare a night ambush while the PCs only have up a weaker guard of a few of the PCs, and most of the PCs are asleep. You could do night ambushes every night and have 4 every night if you wanted to. But obviously, if you do that to a certain degree, everyone in your group is going to get frustrated. Even if you've done some kind of an ecological check and you're like, well, if you were in an area with this many animals, I've done a look over where people have done a canvas of how often you run into a lion in some of these jungles during a night of camping out in the jungle.
And they said that you get attacked 4 times by lions.
And they
Somehow
said that,
they also live.
And they said that statistically there would be up to 4 encounters, although right now the lions are wary of humans so they don't kill you. Or whatever the case may be, I don't think that's real. I don't think you're going to find that data. But even if you did, games are not meant to be completely exactly the same thing that you would find in real life, and eventually your group is going to get really tired of... Not only their characters are going to get tired of waking up for ambushes 4 times every night, but your group is just going to get really tired of dealing with 4 ambushes every night.
So then there's 2 things to consider here. Does the ambush make sense, not just from a real life perspective, but also from the story perspective? A lot of times ambushes are going to make a lot more sense to put when the PCs are in an area where they know it's dangerous, or the ambush is serving the purpose of informing them that area is dangerous. An area that's under control of forces that are opposed to them, or a large wilderness area where dangerous creatures are known to lurk, or they're exploring into new lands and they don't really know where they're going.
Look, I'm not going to tell you, even though I just said don't do 4 ambushes all the time, I'm not going to tell you you're wrong if the PCs go into a military fort, carve their way through 4 of the 30 rooms of this active military fort, then camp in the 4th room of that active military fort, just put on a tent, and just go to sleep. I'm not going to tell you you're wrong to have numerous ambushes as, the soldiers continue patrolling the fort that they're actively running,
but then
and see that there's a bloody tent just randomly in the middle of their dead comrades.
But at that point, you probably do 1 ambush and then you give the PC the chance to hear more soldiers gathering so they can pick up their stuff and run away.
And then if they're like, we're going to keep resting in our tent,
then
it's
that's
just
on them.
That's a little bit on them. Even the first time when, honestly, I wouldn't even go to the first ambush. I'd be like, guys, this is not a video game. You are this is literally an active military fort. You could hear the soldiers. They're going about. They're patrolling. There's gonna at best you're gonna get maybe until the next change of guards before someone comes this way. But honestly, it could happen at any time. Are you really gonna do a long rest for 8 hours here? Yes, we're out of spells. And then it's okay, you sometimes as the GM, you're the iris into the world. You can also be
point out
a voice of common sense when you feel that the characters might have that common sense. If the players are no, we know, we just think it's funny, and our characters just think these soldiers are chumps, so we're gonna do it. Then you understand that they are thinking in character. They just had a weird reaction that you didn't expect. Whereas if they're oh, I didn't think that being in an active fort meant that the soldiers would find us. Then it was important for you to bring that up. I didn't
realize that they would investigate the screaming sounds of combat that they heard from this direction just moments ago.
Yes. So, assuming that they're not doing something that wild and outrageous, it makes sense not to necessarily throw a huge number of ambushes. Now, one of the issues with that can be that if you're the one who's the only sole arbiter of how many times they're ambushed, then no matter how many ambushes you throw, if you have somebody who gets sore about ambushes, they could be upset. That's actually one of the reasons that one of the most old school rules for ambushes is actually still a great one, which is a randomly rolled die that determines whether or not there's a night ambush or a random encounter. That takes it out of your hands. If everybody sees that you rolled and you're like, guys, yeah, we're going to roll this 4 times, and on a natural 20, there's an ambush. And they see you roll 4 20s in a row.
Yeah.
Then they're not going to necessarily... They might groan, but they're not going to, like, be angry at you that there were 4 ambushes that time. And they might even be excited or amused and remember 10 years later. Remember that time that we went to, like, the peaceful woods, but then we got ambushed 4 times because we rolled 4 20s in a row?
One tiny thing about the dice, too, is that, it brings them away from the structure of things being evenly paced in a predictable way, and allows for there to be stretches of peace and calm that are longer than what you would normally put in, as well as more frantic stretches.
Exactly.
So you don't have, like, the whole stereotype of, like, we're walking from point A to point B, we'll be attacked by exactly one random encounter.
Yes, that's right. The one that's talked about a lot of times, I know it's in Order of the Stick, it's in a lot of places, it's like, we'll fight one random encounter, one quote random, but actually planned encounter, just to show us that we're traveling, and then we'll make it there. So, dice are actually really great for that, and I would highly recommend it if you're a GM, and especially if you have players who can sometimes get annoyed at the idea of being ambushed. The dice make it really much more impersonal, and it doesn't feel like you're just saying, we're going to keep ambushing you.
Another good thing to use as a setup for an ambush is the return of someone that the PCs have caused an issue with in the past. Because that can feel like earned, or, that makes sense. The PCs fought the Thieves Guild, but, like, some of the thieves escaped. And then later on, they're attacked by those thieves, and they're like, well, whatever happened to them? Especially if the PCs kind of felt like that was a bothersome loose end that they want to clean up. The loose end comes to them, but in a way that makes sense.
That's right. So they can feel relieved that they finally dealt with that loose end, more so than annoyed that they were ambushed. Now, there is the flip side. Obviously, you have phenomenal cosmic powers to creating ambushes as the GM, but the PCs sometimes have phenomenal cosmic abilities that might even say that they can always do ambush. Like, I don't know. I don't want to throw any particular system under the bus, so I'm just going to make up a hypothetical tabletop RPG system, and one of the characters has an ability called Gloom Curtain that just turns the entire party invisible, inaudible, and undetectable in any way, and has an unlimited number of uses once every, let's say, minute.
Yeah.
And so they're like, okay, well, I'm just going to use Gloom Curtain every minute on our group. And we're just gonna rush into every room as an ambush, whether or not we know that there's something in there or not. And then, if there's not, we back up to a little safe distance, and then I wait a minute, and then I put up another gloom curtain, and we're gonna do that every time. And we're never gonna enter somewhere without gloom curtain. Eventually that's going to get stale for you as the GM. Maybe, probably. It might not get as stale for the group as you think, but you need to gauge everyone. Because Gloom Curtain lady, the one who's putting up the Gloom Curtain,
might be having a great time.
Maybe she could actually have time infinitely for that, but, like, the defender who's like, well, nobody ever gets attacked ever.
So I don't think he used any of my defense
and healing abilities are useless because of Gloom Curtain. We just win. Maybe I should just change my character to an executioner class. I'm making up classes and abilities here. Which maybe that's the answer. Maybe they would have more fun as an executioner. Maybe they do that and they're like, honestly, I'm still bored. My executioner is executing everybody from the Gloom Curtain. And now we win even faster than we did when I was a defender who wasn't doing anything. But maybe everybody likes it. Like, there are some players who will play games, whether that's a tabletop RPG or a video game, and will play hundreds of hours on a game where they're just constantly ambush killing everything that is in the game without any retort. Like, how many people have played Skyrim with an invisible archer?
Yes.
And Linda is seeming to make an expression of, like, a who me.
Yeah, no, I definitely did that. But it was satisfying. It was still satisfying because you had to, like, try to figure out how to position yourself to snipe things when they don't notice you.
But So some people are capable of playing for hundreds of hours where they almost never or literally never get noticed by the enemy and just insta stealth kill them. And sometimes they do that on even easier difficulty modes, even though their like ambushing abilities would be strong enough to let them play on harder difficulty modes and still win. And they intentionally do it on the easier ones because they just are very satisfied by insta winning. So if that's your whole group, then if you as the GM are the only one who's dissatisfied, you still should do something about it. But if you also don't care, then whatever. They can just do Gloom Curtain constantly and you can just win.
Entire skits about Stealth Archer. Yep, I could see that.
Yeah, I figured there would be entire skits about Stealth Archer. Like, based on the amount that Linda does Stealth Archer. So it's
I don't do it in everything. It's just that Skyrim was a very iconic Stealth Archer.
I think David Nielsen's talking about Skyrim Stealth Archer.
Yeah.
So... I think that
no, in Oblivion, I played a magic casting character who didn't like have any physical damage, and then I won against everything except for then I found like some skeletons that were immune to magic, and then I was wrecked because my physical abilities were terrible.
It auto scale. Now Eric Nielsen points out it's rare that everyone will enjoy it, and I was about to get to that because maybe everyone liked it. Maybe you can keep going, but it's rare for that to happen in a tabletop RPG, and most often, if there's even if the whole group of players likes it, most often the GM gets pretty annoyed.
Yeah.
Because you have to do a lot of prep on the hypothetical chance that your adversary can do something.
Yeah.
Only to find out that it can't. Unless you play along and you're like, well, you know what? I'm just going to take a page from the creators of One Punch Man, and I'll just create backstories for these, but I don't even need to know mechanically what these creatures are, because then we'll just be like, all right, this giant conqueror worm has emerged after 10,000 years from the Earth's core. It's going to mind control everybody in the planet. Oh, well, you killed it with Gloom Curtain. Yes. All right, maybe you could even skip the some essences of the combat and be like, okay, we know you use Gloom Curtain. Everyone just roll your attack rolls and damage rolls real fast and tell me how, and then we'll describe to me, narrate how you killed it. We're just going to skip the combat.
There's a good point there from Possible Deal. I'd be very tempted to put neutral and friendlies in encounters if every encounter had a thoughtless Gloom Curtain murder fest. Yeah, absolutely. That's another way to do it, is you have to take time to assess if it's actually something you want to attack.
Yeah, you could do that. That could be a way around it as the GM. Now, more likely, though, even though we said the scenario where only one person isn't having fun, it's usually going to be the GM. More likely, it's probably going to be, the GM and some of the players.
Or, really...
Like I talked about with the Defender, they might not always want to play ball and change to an Executioner, and even then, they might not be excited about this sort of cheesy auto-win tactic.
So you're going to want to talk to your group about that. You may want to put in a house rule on Gloom Curtain. Let's say you're Gloom Curtain's a really awesome strategy, but it does look like you've fallen back on that a lot, and not everybody's having a good time with that. What if we change Gloom Curtain to, let's change Gloom Curtain to, a once per day ability?
Yes.
And then, and then if they're I don't like Gloom Curtain if it's only once per day, and then they can
and maybe it's not good enough if it's only once per day.
Maybe it's not good if it's only once per day. But, if you some sort of limitation that could allow them to still use it sometimes, but not, it's a sometimes snack and not let's use this for every single encounter.
So, Linda has moved right on to the really good advice for this. I want to actually offer to you some advice that I think is legitimately bad advice for a lot of people, but that is the one you will find is offered most often. Okay? And not only that, but for a lot of people it is good advice. And for some styles of game, the entire game is based upon the fact that players will naturally be able to use this advice, which is the advice you'll see a lot is well then just tell the players, don't use Gloom Curtain sometimes. Only use it some of the time and not the other times. So I think this is actually, for the scenario we've set up, where the player takes Gloom Curtain, they've come up with the idea for Gloom Curtain, they like it, maybe some percentage of the group does too, and it works. This is the worst advice you could possibly try to do. It'll sometimes be described as tell them to get found, or that they just need to learn to let other people do things or something like that. The problem is that they have found a strategy that should work. There's no reason that it doesn't work. And people sometimes think the only reason they wouldn't want to use it is because of the fact that they're optimizers, but part of it is just like role play and getting into their character. It is nonsensical for that player's character to the degree of being like suicidal.
Yeah.
For
like,
them
what if
to
a
be
character
like,
dies in an encounter they chose not to use
what
Gloom
if
Curtain?
one of their best friends died because they're like, oh, I decided to only use Gloom Curtain 10% of the time for no reason. Like, I personally find this to be outrageously bad advice. I normally on this channel just to be, some things are good, some things are bad, find a middle path. And I want it, but that's my hot take on that advice, is that is not good advice. Linda's advice was good advice. Find a way in the narrative and the game that they can't use Gloom Curtain. Don't tell them they should just not use it for no adequately explored reason.
Or maybe, maybe they've discovered something about Gloom Curtain that whenever they open the abyss gazes back, and there's like some risk that's involved with using Gloom Curtain a lot. Or, you can work with them to come up with some reason why that changes.
Right. My thought was that maybe Gloom Curtain is still usable often, because once a day is a pretty drastic thing for once a minute, but maybe it's not as powerful as it was before. Maybe there's a chance that it fails and you can't tell that, like, you're kind of shimmering a little bit as you're moving, and so that the enemies have a chance to spot you. And so maybe in the game system that we're coming up with, it was a 100% ambush every time, but then maybe the GM is like, okay, I am going to roll a fortune dice. Listen, I'm just making up mechanics and names for things to try to not sound like I'm any given system. I'm going to roll a fortune dice, which is a D100 percentage, and it says here there's a 40% chance that you'll be noticed. Or whatever the case may be. And yes, that means 60% of the counters are negated by a Gloom Curtain, but maybe 40% are not. And you know what? Maybe there's a better solution to it than that. You could also, the GM could be like, great, we're going to keep Gloom Curtain just as strong, but we're changing the ambush rules of the game to just not be as good. And that also means that the enemies won't get as good of an ambush against you if they ever manage to ambush you while you're asleep and don't have up a Gloom Curtain.
And one thing we want to do whenever you change the rules is offer the players rebuilds, because if they don't like how you change one of their character's abilities, to have them be able to pick something else instead.
Absolutely.
I see a comment from Eric about trying to use Rule of Cool or Exploit combo that works once and attempted to spend a hero point to use it again. So it's like, circumstances were in your favor this time, but this isn't something that's always going to work out. Absolutely.
That's true. And that brings to another way of putting it, where Linda put, maybe you have a get greedy, super bad roll negative thing, like the Abyss gazes back. But Eric points out you could also make it cost a meta resource of some kind to have the Gloom Curtain and ambush succeed. Or maybe you change Gloom Curtain so that you have to know what the enemies are so that you can put the gloom before them, because it depends. The creature's senses are going to be different for every type of creature, so it requires you to let the party scout ahead without Gloom Curtain first, and then come back and tell the party what the creature is, so that you can then use. Or maybe
Gloom Curtain cloaks the creature's eyes in darkness, and so it doesn't do anything against creatures that can see in the dark.
There's lots of ways around it, and I would highly recommend coming up with an in-game way rather than just telling the player to only use Gloom Curtain some of the time. Now, that being said, telling the player to use Gloom Curtain none of the time and that you're banning it is a perfectly reasonable answer to it. Just like the one that I can't abide by is, you can keep it, and still does the same thing, and there's no reason not to use it, but I'm just telling you not to because we're not having as much fun. That is just kind of abrogating the responsibility for fixing the issue and putting it all onto the player, while also forcing them to have their character's actions not make sense. So that is my sort of advanced tips for dealing with player ambushes that are getting out of hand, and of course your ability as the GM to make ambushes that get out of hand. And some of it goes back to the basics with those rolls for random encounters and those rolls for ambushes. They have existed for a reason. Some of the things from the early days of D&D are not great rules mechanics that we think of now in 2025 and are like, maybe maybe some of the math was more difficult when you had to, like, when lower armor classes were better, and then THAC0 was an improvement, but it was still not the greatest situation. Okay, that's fine. But those rolls for random encounters are actually good, because it changes the responsibility and the pacing to not be like, Linda made us fight 5 encounters, but it's like, yeah, the die was going crazy, and we fought 5 encounters.
Yeah.
And then from the PC side, again, this is the same way that the die roll is great from your side as the GM on ambushes. Don't put it on the player to tell them don't use your ability that you can use, but instead work with them to change the mechanics or just ban it or something like that, so that there's a reason that it doesn't work that way, rather than a just like, well, don't.
And another thing that was kind of embedded in your answer is that when you change something, be sure to change it across the board.
Yes, you
Not
have
just
to do
against the
that.
PCs.
Don't just be like, well, you can't use Gloom Curtain, but I'm banning it from you. But some monsters have it, and they're gonna still have it. That's just like,
yeah,
that's not really
that's not
very
fair.
nice.
But if you're like, I think we're gonna just take Gloom Curtain out of the game, and then nobody's gonna have Gloom Curtain anymore, so you don't have to worry about enemies having it, but you also can't use it.
That's right. And similarly, if you change all of the ambush rules for the PCs to be weaker, but then like, when the bad guys get ambushed, they get the original ambush rules.
No, that's not.
That also just doesn't feel fair. Usually, when you have an issue with the ambush rules, it should be because of the fact that there is something that is kind of feeling unfun or unfair for either side when it happens. And that is what can help your group have a social contract for changing it, and make everyone feel good about the fact that you changed it, rather than feel like there was some kind of like adversarial reason.
Yeah, it's like, the player was clever and the players were clever and they found out a really good strategy that just became too effective and it was starting to warp the game. So then the game itself needed to change to create a different, fair, balanced state.
100%. So that's the trouble with ambushes in RPGs, but I hope that from the tips that we gave you, the advice of what to do and what not to do, that you're going to be able to kind of tame ambushes in your RPG, even if you're playing one of the ones with really outrageous ambushes. Make them something that people have fun with, that feel like they make sense in the world, and that nobody is frustrated at the other players, including the GM, at the table. So, please like or subscribe if you've enjoyed this content, or even join if you'd like to support us. We're not going to have a vote for the next week's episode because we ambushed you with this topic of ambushes.
Because we forgot that ambushes didn't win.
It was supposed to be about house rules, and we accidentally did ambushes, so it was an ambush on ambushes. So we'll see you on Tuesday to talk about the Eldamon element. You can go to tiny.cc/arcademarked, our Discord, to vote. It's currently a tie, I think. I will put it in tiny.cc/arcademarked. Next Tuesday, we'll talk about house rules. And also, should be tomorrow, but we're hoping to have out a video for this Dungeon Jam 2025 on 5-room dungeons of a system-neutral and setting-neutral dungeon. It only said it had to be setting-neutral. It could have been not system-neutral. We're going to make it system-neutral. The kind of dungeon that has the simple bullet points that will let you run it, even in a system that more deals with bullet points than very specific prearranged dungeons like a Forged in the Dark or Powered by the Apocalypse or Daggerheart style. It also, because it's so sort of more of a like, here are some things and here's how you use them, it could work well in sort of an OSR or Shadow Dark sort of point of view as well. So it's not just going to be from the perspective of a Pathfinder or D&D dungeon. So we should have that up tomorrow on the first day, but we might not. All right. Take care, everyone.
Let's give everybody XP.
Yes, I actually gave them XP partway through, but only halfway. So I'll give them the second half worth of XP.
Sweet. Thanks so much for joining us.